So it's impossible. Thanks to be here. By the way, it was great listening to the presentations earlier. They were all fantastic. We need more of it. You can never introduce me as a big brain because I failed grade 9 math 3 times. Finally, through just pure embarrassment, it was just time to wake up and think about how to move on. But I'm incredibly passionate about the labor community, the social justice community, and how we can do things differently. I like to think of myself as a frustrated optimist. And I say frustrated because I think that our movement has so much potential. However, I think that we also have weaknesses that if we're ever going to reach our potential, we really need to have sober conversations about what those weaknesses are structurally so that we can do a better job moving forward. Janice, I heard you up there talking about, like reclaiming, reimagining democracy. And I know that really has to be a core function. When you really think about where most people are at today in the community, I think I heard Pam, you're even saying people are actually pulling back from democracy, and we've got to think of ways that they can plug in. And it might not necessarily be our thing. It's actually getting them to plug in a way that fits their time, interest, comfort, what's relevant to their current circumstances that allows them to fit in. Thinking about, for example, even my community, it really is about getting together with a whole bunch of different groups and developing kind of a common storyline. One of the things that we know, and I would imagine in Windsor, as it is in other communities, what do we know? That inequality is continuing to rise. We're losing good jobs. When it comes to democracy, for example, we all feel like decisions are being made far removed outside of the reaches, the democratic reaches and interests of everyday ordinary people. Our health, our public services are all under attack. And then you just have to basically look at what's happening in the States today to know that that's just kind of a small sign of what happens with our relationships with one another if we're not actually building that type of educative narrative around politics about what type of world that we're kind of inheriting. So what we did in Windsor-Essex was we come together and we said that we needed to develop a neutral space. And I was just mentioning to Janice, I think the idea, this hub idea, is really fantastic. But when we went and engaged, for example, the labor community, the environmental community in Windsor-Essex, one of the things that people were saying about the labor community, for example, is you're not very humble when you enter a room. You have checkbooks, you walk around and it's like this is the way that it is. Labor gets to put their hand on the red button and call an emergency action. But when it comes to all the other groups, whether you're talking about migrant workers or you're talking about inequality, there's a real feeling that we're not really creating an equitable movement moving forward. So there was trust issues. And then even, for example, if one particular group really was leading on an initiative that was actually capturing some legs, it didn't take very long before perhaps the labor community found a way to kind of pull the carpet out. So one of the things we talked about is the need to create a space. And another part was we need to create a common story, a theme that we can all organize around. And it really was about, this is the way society's going, so what is it that we all need together? We need to build some common infrastructure. What is it that we can share? How is it that we can help one another? I mentioned to Tina that solidarity doesn't mean anything if you're not doing anything together. If it's just about us sitting in the room talking about solidarity, but there's no way to express it, it really doesn't mean a lot. And then if you've got to think about, it's great that we can get together and talk and theorize about how we build a movement, but if we're not out there actually experimenting and doing things together, then it's pretty hard to build a movement because we need to find out who's prepared to actually go out and do things. One of the things that I can say that makes me incredibly optimistic is I learned that if we put leaflets out in the workplace or in the community, don't expect people to come and attend your event. But if you actually ask people, will you come? Will you do this? What fits your time, interest, comfort level? What do you care about? It doesn't take very long for people to think about how they can plug in. I think, for example, in the workplace, and I think about, or even in the community, that we organize backwards. We usually run to them and we say to them, hey, come join our $15 fairness campaign. Come be opposed to the TPP. Instead of actually asking people, what is it that you care about? What are you most concerned about? How is it that we can support you? And I know this might sound completely silly. I always want to tell this story now. But my brother, my daughter, absolutely loves animals. And I know it sounds crazy. This might sound crazy. But the reality is that they were never really plugged into democracy, thinking about how to change things. And so there's two dogs that live behind my brother's house, and they're out there in the cold in the wintertime and in the summertime. And I know it might sound silly, but when people, if you look at the Windsor Star columns, when people see animal abuse, they're outraged. And I was saying to my dad, I said, here's a funny thing. You've got all these people that care about this particular issue. What if we actually showed them how to make systematic and structural change? And again, we don't suggest that the union in any shape or form or community groups got to actually drive that particular issue, but it's going up to Chris and saying, would you care, and figure out how we can provide you the resources to make that change. Chances are, if we supported you, we connected with you, we've deepened our relationship, chances are now when I want to come and talk to you about migrant workers, that you'll be there with us. One of the things we know is that people do want change. People are unhappy with the way things are, but they don't know how to plug in. And then I'm going to be critical of the labor community for a second. And here's a concrete example. During the last federal election, we said, again, let's make this about dues. Let's provide a checklist. And I know we're going to get into this. We're using the Nation Builder technology. And this really is a game changer when it comes to organizing. And it was about saying, hey, I'll sign on to the Vote Promise Pledge. Later on was, I'll commit to get two or three more people that will vote. And then we're thinking, well, what's the next thing beyond that? Can you get someone to share this on Facebook that you'll get them to vote too? So, sign them up. Okay, wait a minute. Will you hand out 50 to 100 leaflets on your street? And when we asked for on your street, we also asked in your workplace. Because my history after 20 years, and even when my father was the president of the union, if we wanted to get a leaflet inside the workplace and give it to the representatives to get, no matter what the issue is, if you were organizing workers, there's no way that it was getting on the workplace shop floor. So we had about 30,000 of these from Labor Council, and again, we got a great Labor Council president, and probably out of these 30,000 leaflets, we had about 26,000 of them that never made it into the workplaces. And so when you think about, there's teachers, there's people in QP, there's people at the universities. The reality is we didn't even have the basic infrastructure to get this done. And then how many times even during elections where they ask you, will you go hand out leaflets 30 kilometers from where you live? Well, wait a minute, can't we organize this in a way that you can at least take responsibility of your street? How do we take back our streets? How do we take back our neighborhoods? How do we build relationships? And so I want to move to some campaigns now, which I think are awesome. Campaigns are ways, like Annie said, petitions are a way to have a conversation, build a relationship. Campaigns are a way to have a conversation, deepen a relationship, but not just a relationship, finding out what it is that people are prepared to do. So I look at the hydro campaign, I just mentioned it to you. What a fantastic thing to actually ask people, what is it that you're prepared to do? And how many, if we actually did it across the community, how many people would say, yeah, I would do that? Could we have a mock referendum? In Windsor-Essex, for example, we're talking about having a mock referendum with the healthcare, with Natalie Muir, with the Healthcare Coalition. And the whole concept is just about the importance of winning that particular issue or raising awareness. It really is about building capacity, building relationships, giving people something to do. Another thing about organizing that I've absolutely learned that is key is that people need to feel relevant. They need to feel like their contribution's meaningful. Sitting at the back room of a hall or a meeting where you're not asked to do anything doesn't really make a difference. So we're saying now, you know what, if we do get Stewie to come help us, let's not focus in on the leader, Natalie Mira. Let's focus on Stu the first time he knocked on a door. let's tell a paragraph about, his experience and how he made a difference in telling those personal stories of everyday ordinary people. And so again, you're building capacity, you're building power, and then at the end of the campaigns, we're actually saying, wouldn't it be great if we could develop 40 or 50 people in our community that actually could learn everything about electricity. I was a city councillor, for example, for 7 years, and again, I'm no brain, but I really, when you look at what's happening in Michigan with Schneider, and you look at when you look at what happened in Walkerton when the right-wingers get their hands on public assets, bad things happen to people. But one thing we do know is that if we just put everyday ordinary people and give them the responsibility to learn the basics of how your water system works, how your electricity system works. I mean, I always say, if you give everyday ordinary people the basic information, 95% of the time they'll make those tough choices, those difficult choices, those complex choices. And it's not just about the politicians, but you're building capacity. You're bringing people into democracy. You're telling people that they matter. So we need to create, and I love, I think it was Janice and Pam, Chris, Tina, we need to think about how we build spaces. More spaces where people could actually develop, make a contribution, show that they matter, and then again showing everyday ordinary people making a difference. So I say to Pam, for example, and I want to go back to the nation builder for a second. The best part of bringing people into our movement is also obviously a face-to-face conversation. The second part is, I'll never forget, I think it was just about a month ago, I called Pam in the morning and I said, there was just an article where they were talking about at a Tim Hortons store where they're laying off Tim Hortons workers. Tim Hortons was just bought over by this consortium and they were trying to find efficiencies, which is people with 30 years seniority, no seniority system in the Tim Hortons, were essentially getting shown the door. We need to think about how we could take that article, put it into communities like Windsor and Essex, with a sign-on sheet. Are you outraged? Check. Would you come to a meeting on this particular issue? Check. Are you a temp worker that's getting screwed around? Check. I even say Kevin's a perfect example. I had a guy from Sarnia. He came to Windsor-Essex, concerned about what was happening with WSIB. And so you look at all the people that are getting screwed around in communities throughout. The labor community speaks out on behalf, but we have no relationship in our community with injured workers. We do, we got the 3 or 4 that show up. What we need to be saying is, how can we provide you the resources, the supports, so that you could actually go out and organize. You can develop your own strategies, your own tactics, strategies and tactics. Why can't we, and I challenged and I says, where's your allies, where's your friends, where's your family, so that we can identify allies, so we could knock on doors in a community, whether it's on hydro, whether it's on minimum wage, whether it's on WSIB. Let's knock on doors and say, democracy is as easy as stepping outside your door. Let's having a conversation about what's happening to people living in our community. Call the paper, call the newspaper. The newspaper is going to report on it because it's an interesting approach to organizing. And at the same time, when the paper reports on it the next day, all injured workers, all people fighting for minimum wage, all people should have a contact where they're going to go and say, I'm interested in this particular fight. Yeah. So we should always be thinking about, how do we build a magnet that's going to draw people into our movement, and then after we've drawn them into the movement, what are the type of supportive attributes that we have to build so that people stay? Yep. So that they're not just coming to a meeting, but they're actually developing some tactics and some strategies. I'll conclude it by throwing this at you. We're building on our Nation Builder site, which is really cool. We're saying, are you concerned about what's happening with our future? Are you concerned about your kids' future? Jobs, environment, public service. Are you concerned that the next generation's not going to have what this previous generation had? People, yeah. Okay, are you prepared to do something? I always joke around and say, you know what? Let's imagine, Stewie, Janice, if 100 people showed up at your door tomorrow, what would you do with them? That's our dream. It's our dream that we get 100 people that are batting at our door, but if they actually do come to our door, we don't know what to do with them. We need to have tons of spaces that again, where we're thinking about how we can develop them. We need to create, and I congratulate Pam for mentioning it, every time we were challenged throughout the past, we created new spaces, new structures. The women's movement, gays, lesbians, transgender, civil rights movement, you name it, we had these fights, we had these internal tensions, and the labor movement, for example, never just said, yeah, come on, let's do this. But we're not even having those debates. That's what I'm concerned about in the workplace. We're not even having those types of debates and discussions today. So I look at all the campaigns, the $15 fairness, and my challenges, and I called Pam and said, our movement has so much capacity, so much talent, so much skill, so much information, and then at the bottom, there's a disconnect. There's people there's activists on the ground that perhaps don't have the tools or the resources, and we need to think about how to close that gap. So I'm just imagining that, how is it that we close the gap? And Janice, I want to touch on, for example, CUPE. A couple of things that are happening in my community right now. We have library workers that are about to get locked out. And what are they going after? They're going after the sick days. And so for the first time on Monday, we're meeting with some workers to say, you know what, maybe the strategy is not about getting out there and defending our sick days. Maybe the strategy is to go out and say, under Pam's campaign, that these are all we need sick days. We need to improve the standards. We need to stop this backward thinking. We had a conversation about 6 months ago when they were talking about outsourcing janitors at the university. Now the city of Windsor is talking about taking $23, $24 an hour jobs, and the councillor said that we have a fiducial responsibility to the taxpayer that we're going to bring those down to minimum wage jobs. And so we said, wait a minute, we can't allow CUPE to go through this like they've normally done. We can't continue the same process. We need to actually get the workers, which we're doing on Monday, we're meeting, and there we're going to have the workers go talk to the workers at Unifor that are doing janitorial work in the schools, in the hospitals, and make the connection that after they're done with us, they're coming for you. And then we're going to go into the long-term care facilities and say, guess what, after they're done with us, you know what I mean? They're kind of, what type of jobs are we leaving our kids? And then we're saying, you know what? Instead of just having the union leaders come up, we need to bring up Rod and say, I'm a hockey coach. And if I had 2 jobs, and that means I can't be a hockey coach. And what type of vision of society are we leading towards? So I'll shut up. I know this is kind of convoluted, but every single thing that we have to do has to be about organizing and broadening your base. It has. Every time that you're finished a campaign, you need to come in and say, you know what, if you're sitting in the room with the same 15 people that you sat in when you started the campaign, you failed. You failed. So I mean, we should set up some type of checklist. We need to start experimenting with one another, what different communities are doing in terms of best practices, and how are we building the base. And our health coalition, perfect example. We called the Muslim, they have a community center. And we said, we want to hold our healthcare coalition in your community center. We have union halls. It was a great opportunity to go build relationships and start thinking about how we can move out. We have campaigns. We said, guess what? Did you talk to any faces that weren't white? You know what I mean? Where's women? Where's the youth? Where's the seniors? So we're starting to develop an internal checklist that every one of our campaigns better be connected to reflecting the rhetoric that we throw out there. So that's kind of it.